All right, your next type of question, this one is referred to as the rhetorical analysis. And you have your prompt up here at the top. We've seen some of these as we've been doing our critical reading. And then down here is your passage. Now, I'm looking at the 2014 test, so again, we're looking at the Adams prompt that we spent quite a bit of time with, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one, but I am going to go through how I would develop a thesis for a rhetorical analysis. Now, the prompt for a rhetorical analysis is always going to have some context to kind of provide you with the basics of that rhetorical situation. So right here I have the context, who my speaker is, who she's talking to, that he's traveling with his father, who is a diplomat, and the future president of the United States. Then it usually has a word like read carefully, and then in a well-developed essay, analyze the rhetorical strategies Adams uses to advise her son. Support your analysis with specific references to the text, or, ooh, that's very thick. In other words, evidence. Okay? So the good thing about rhetorical analysis is that your task is going to be the same every time. They want you to tell me what is the purpose of the text and how does the author achieve it. So this is a good example of where that open versus closed thesis might come into play. An open thesis for this one is probably just going to state part A. What is the purpose the author's trying to achieve? Whereas a closed thesis is also going to have the how, in which you preview the different strategies you're going to talk about. So for example, when we did our candy mapping activity and we talked about how Adams is evoking pride and duty in her child at the end, I might use that as one of the main pieces of my argument. So let me kind of illustrate what I mean here. We'll come back to thesis in just a second, but I'm going to talk about strategy number 1 and strategy number 2. And if I have time, I would absolutely do a third strategy. It kind of depends on your own pace as far as how many body paragraphs you can come up with. So we can talk about how she evokes pride and duty, and that kind of happens in this part of the text. I didn't copy the whole thing because we've looked at it enough. But then we can also talk about how she cites the alternate perspective. And so if I'm going to do a closed thesis, remember a closed thesis is one that provides a preview. I'm going to mention both of those pieces of my line of reasoning. So the only other piece I need in addition to that then is my purpose. Okay, so for this passage, we've talked that her purpose is to encourage her son to make the most of this particular opportunity. So my thesis would be something along the lines of, in the letter to her son, Abigail Adams encourages him to make the most of this voyage by evoking pride and duty and citing an alternate perspective. All right, so this is an example of a closed thesis because I have one of my strategies previewed. Let me just change my color here. But I also have my other one previewed. So anytime that you're kind of listing the different pieces of your argument like this, that's an example of that closed thesis. The only other part I have is right here where I did the purpose. So as you can notice, I have my purpose, and then I also have my how, which is covered by those 2 bullet points I have under my strategies. All right, so a thesis for a rhetorical analysis, if it's open, it's simply just stating what is the author's purpose. So, for example, with this example, I could say, in the letter to her son, Abigail Adams encourages him to make the most of his voyage, period. That would be an open thesis, because I would then go into my main points in the writing. But my full example here is an example of the closed thesis, because I have the 2 strategies laid out that I will talk about in the paper.